There is a moment many people never forget. It is not the moment they failed. It is not the moment they were rejected. It is the moment they finally began to rise and noticed who went quiet. No argument, no confrontation, no obvious hatred, just silence. A strange silence. The kind that arrives right after your progress becomes visible, right after your confidence becomes stable, right after your work begins to pay off. They were warm when you were confused, supportive when you were struggling, available when you were uncertain. But the moment you became undeniable, they became distant. And that silence confuses people, because open jealousy is easy to understand. But silent jealousy, that is different. It hides behind politeness. It disguises itself as busyness, as indifference, as emotional neutrality. But often it is none of those things. Often it is the quiet reaction of a person whose inner world has just been disturbed by your outer life. Carl Jung helps us understand why. Because jealousy is not always loud. Sometimes it does not speak. Sometimes it withdraws. Sometimes it stares. Sometimes it smiles less. Sometimes it stops clapping. And sometimes silence is the most honest confession an insecure person can make. This video is about that silence, why it happens, what it means, and why the people who once had the most to say often become the quietest the moment you start winning. Because in many cases, they are not ignoring your success. They are being forced to confront themselves through it. And that is far more painful. If you have ever grown in a visible way, you have probably seen this pattern. When your life was uncertain, people felt comfortable around you. When you doubted yourself, they knew how to engage with you. When you were still figuring things out, they had language for you. Advice, comfort, opinions, guidance. But once you started becoming more disciplined, more focused, more self-contained, something shifted. They stopped checking in. They stopped encouraging you. They stopped celebrating you with the same energy they once offered when you were struggling. And at first, you may have interpreted it generously. Maybe they are busy. Maybe life got in the way. Maybe you are overthinking it. But then the pattern repeats. You share progress, and they respond with little or nothing. You achieve something meaningful, and they disappear. You become more confident, and they become more emotionally unavailable. Why? Because not everyone is comfortable with your growth. Some people can tolerate your pain far more easily than your power. They can relate to your confusion. They can feel safe around your insecurity. They can even feel valuable in your brokenness. But your wholeness, your order, your self-respect, that changes the emotional contract. Now you are no longer available to them in the same way. Now you are no longer a source of comparison they can comfortably manage. Now your life starts asking silent questions they do not want to answer. Why didn't I do more with my potential? Why am I still making the same excuses? Why does their discipline make my passivity feel exposed? Why does their transformation make my comfort feel like surrender? This is the beginning of silent jealousy. Not shouting, not attack, withdrawal. Because some people do not know how to process another person's growth without experiencing it as personal exposure. And when they cannot compete with what you are becoming, their first instinct is often not to fight you. It is to emotionally retreat from the mirror you have become. Carl Jung believed that every person carries a shadow, not a monster in the dramatic sense, something more intimate than that. The shadow is the part of the self that has been rejected, buried, denied, or left undeveloped. It contains impulses people do not want to own. But it also contains potential they never had the courage to live out. This is important, because the shadow is not only made of darkness, it is also made of unused strength, abandoned ambition, disowned gifts, unlived life. That means when someone sees you becoming disciplined, confident, creative, respected or powerful, they are not just seeing you. They are also seeing what they might have become, and that is where the problem begins. In Jungian psychology, when a person cannot tolerate what is stirred inside them, they project it outward. Instead of facing their own envy, they judge your ambition. Instead of confronting their own passivity, they call you obsessed. Instead of admitting your growth makes them feel small, they become distant and pretend nothing happened. Silence, in this sense, can be a defense, a way of avoiding conscious contact with what your existence has activated inside them. Because if they were to genuinely acknowledge your progress, they would also have to acknowledge what it reveals. Your consistency reveals their inconsistency. Your courage reveals their hesitation. Your structure reveals their chaos. Your evolution reveals their stagnation. And many people would rather go quiet than go inward. That is what makes the silence so psychologically revealing. It is not always hatred. Sometimes it is refusal. Refusal to look at the parts of themselves your growth has illuminated. Jung understood that the ego protects itself at all costs, and one of the easiest ways it protects itself is by withdrawing from whatever threatens its preferred self-image. So if someone wants to believe they are capable, disciplined, brave and evolving, but your life now proves otherwise, your success becomes dangerous. Not because you attacked them, but because you contradicted the story they tell themselves. That contradiction creates discomfort. And when weaker personalities cannot process discomfort consciously, they go silent. Open jealousy is crude, it is obvious, you can name it, you can respond to it. But silent jealousy is more unsettling because it destabilizes reality. It leaves you asking questions. Did I do something wrong? Did I change too much? Are they upset with me? Why did their energy shift? That uncertainty is what makes it painful, because human beings are deeply sensitive to emotional withdrawal, especially from people who once seemed supportive. And jealous people often know this instinctively. They know that saying nothing can do more psychological damage than saying something petty. Why? Because silence creates ambiguity, and ambiguity forces you to do the work for them. You begin interpreting the distance, reading the pauses, filling in the blanks. That is why some people do not confront you. They simply reduce their warmth and let you feel the temperature change. It is passive power, a silent punishment, not always consciously planned, but psychologically real. And the reason it hurts so much is simple. You expected their support to remain stable when your life improved. But for some people, your improvement was the very thing that made support impossible. They liked being near your potential. They did not like watching it become real. There is a painful truth many people discover too late. Some relationships are built on hidden emotional hierarchies. As long as you are less certain, less successful, less disciplined, less powerful, the bond feels stable. But once that hierarchy is disrupted, the relationship changes, not because you betrayed them, but because you stopped occupying the position that made them feel safe. And when your growth silently removes that comfort, silence often follows. In other words, their quietness is not random. It is a response to lost emotional advantage. They may not even fully understand it themselves, but they feel it. They feel less needed, less superior, less secure, less central. So they say less, not because you did something wrong, but because your rise changed the emotional geometry. Reason 1. Your winning becomes a mirror they did not ask for. The first reason jealous people go silent when you start winning is this. Your life becomes a mirror they did not ask to look into. And most people do not mind a mirror until it tells the truth. As long as you were struggling too, they could maintain certain illusions, that they were just taking their time. that they had more potential than discipline, that one day they would get serious, that life was simply unfair to them. But once you begin winning, those illusions weaken. Now there is evidence that consistency matters, evidence that change is possible, evidence that effort accumulates, evidence that excuses expire. Your success becomes living contradiction. It does not only say something positive about you, it says something uncomfortable about them. And if they do not have the maturity to let your success inspire self-reflection, they experience it as humiliation. This is why silence appears, because speech would require acknowledgement, acknowledgement would require honesty, and honesty would require them to admit that your growth has exposed something in them they were trying not to see. Jung would say the shadow has been activated, the unlived self has been stirred. The part of them that knows they abandoned their own depth now stands face to face with someone who did not. That creates psychic tension. And one of the easiest ways to reduce psychic tension is avoidance. So instead of celebrating your win, they withdraw. Instead of asking how you changed, they retreat into distance. Instead of confronting their own passivity, they pretend your transformation is irrelevant. But silence does not mean irrelevance. In many cases, silence means impact, a profound one. The kind of impact that makes someone quieter because the truth has become harder to escape. So if people grew strangely quiet as you began to elevate your life, do not miss the meaning. You may have become a mirror at the exact moment they could no longer tolerate reflection. Reason 2. They preferred the version of you that needed something. There is another reason the silence shows up, a more personal one. Some people were attached to the version of you that still needed something, needed reassurance, needed direction, needed help, needed permission, needed emotional rescue. That version of you gave them a role, and roles are powerful. When people feel useful in your insecurity, they often form an identity around it. The advisor, the fixer, the wiser one, the stable one, the one who knows better. But when you start winning, something changes. You stop asking for the same reassurance. You stop collapsing in the same ways. You stop needing their constant emotional management. And that shift can provoke resentment, because now they are not sure who they are in relation to you. Their identity loses relevance, their role weakens, their emotional power shrinks. This happens in friendships, families, workplaces, even romantic relationships. Many people are far more comfortable being needed than being inspired. Why? Because being needed gives control. Being inspired requires growth, and not everyone wants to grow. Some just want to remain important. So when your healing, discipline, confidence, or success removes the role they once played in your life, silence becomes their response, a withdrawal of warmth, a quiet refusal to adjust to the stronger version of you. This is why some people only seem emotionally generous when you are unstable. Your instability gave them access. Your strength reduces it. And if their connection to you was partly built on that access, your growth will feel like loss to them. Not loss of love, loss of position, loss of influence, loss of psychological importance. That is why their silence can feel almost punishing, because in a way it is. You are no longer confirming their place in the old structure. And rather than evolve with you, they step back and let silence express what they are too unconscious to say. I liked you better when I had more power in your life. Reason 3. Silence is a form of covert resistance. Not all silence is confusion. Some silence is resistance. Covert resistance. A subtle refusal to emotionally validate what threatens them. This is especially common when someone cannot openly criticize your progress. They know you worked for it. They know the result is real. They know an obvious attack would expose them, so they choose something quieter. They withhold response. They give less enthusiasm than the moment deserves. They acknowledge your growth with flatness, delay, or emotional absence. This is not always an accident. Sometimes it is the jealous mind trying to reduce your momentum through non-recognition. Because recognition gives energy. Recognition confirms reality. Recognition strengthens confidence. So withholding it becomes a small act of sabotage. A way of saying, without saying, I will not add emotional weight to your rise. Again, this may not be fully conscious, but it is real. And if you pay attention, you will notice something. The same people who become silent when you succeed often had no problem speaking when you were lost. They had advice then, opinions then, presence then. Because your confusion gave them psychological room, your clarity does not. Silence in this context becomes their last available form of control. They cannot stop your success, but they can refuse to honor it. They cannot outshine you, but they can lower the emotional light around your moment. They cannot argue with the result, but they can pretend the result does not deserve much response. This is why selective silence is such a revealing behavior. It is not emptiness, it is message. And the message is this: I do not want to feed what reminds me of my own inadequacy. That is why it is so important not to beg for emotional acknowledgement from people who have already shown you the truth. The more you chase validation from silent people, the more power you hand back to those who resent what you are becoming. Learn the pattern. Silence is sometimes not a lack of feeling. It is concealed feeling, uncomfortable feeling, threatened feeling, envious feeling, and once you understand that, you stop interpreting their quietness as mystery. You see it for what it often is, a quiet refusal to participate in your rise. Reason 4. Your winning disrupts group psychology. Jealous silence is rarely only individual. It can become social, because every group has an unconscious structure, roles, expectations, invisible rankings, old identities, the dependable one, the funny one, the broken one, the ambitious one, the safe one, the underestimated one, and the problem begins when you stop playing your assigned role. If a group has unconsciously fixed you in a lower, softer, more predictable position, your growth can disturb the entire system. Now, you are not as easy to define, not as available for old narratives, not as willing to shrink to preserve familiarity. And groups often respond to that disruption with silence before they respond with words. Why? Because the system needs time to process the threat. Your rise forces recalibration. It changes who seems strong, who seems stagnant, who seems serious, who seems unserious. And many people inside the group do not want to confront that new comparison. So the atmosphere changes. Less warmth, less affirmation, less inclusion, less ease. The room gets quieter around you, not because you became wrong, but because you became difficult to place inside the old emotional order. This is one of the loneliest stages of growth, not because you have done something harmful, but because becoming more real often disrupts the comfort of collective denial. Jung would understand this well. Individuation is not a group-friendly process. The more a person becomes who they actually are, the more tension they create in environments built on masks, roles, and mutual avoidance. So if your growth caused certain circles to become colder or quieter, it may not be personal in the shallow sense. It may be structural. You changed, and your change exposed the unconscious terms under which the group once accepted you. The silence is part of the recalibration, and sometimes it is the first sign that you have outgrown the emotional architecture you used to live inside. Reason 5. They fear what your winning says about their future. There is one final reason many jealous people go silent when you start winning. Your success does not only expose their past, it threatens their future. because now they can no longer comfortably believe that time will solve what only courage can solve. Before your rise, they could tell themselves there was still plenty of time, that they would eventually focus, eventually commit, eventually become serious, eventually face themselves. But your progress makes eventually feel thinner. Now someone they knew, someone once beside them, has moved, has changed, has built something, has become sharper, more disciplined, more inwardly ordered. And suddenly, time feels real. The gap becomes measurable, not imaginary. That is frightening, because for many people the most painful realization is not, "I failed." It is, "I am watching time reward the people who acted while I remained the same." That is why your winning can create silence soaked in grief. Not grief for you, grief for themselves, for what they postponed, for what they diluted, for what they abandoned in exchange for comfort. But because many people cannot admit grief of that kind, it comes out as distance, flatness, silence, a lack of congratulation that says more than a direct insult ever could. You represent movement, and movement forces the stagnant to feel time. That is why your success can make old companions feel strangely far away. Not because you became arrogant, not because you forgot them, but because your life has become a clock they did not want to hear ticking. Now comes the important part. What do you do with this silence? First, do not chase it. Do not beg for clarity from people whose silence already gave you clarity. Do not perform humility just to make others comfortable with your rise. Do not shrink your joy to protect the fragile self-image of those who cannot bear your progress. And do not waste your energy trying to force enthusiasm from people who feel wounded by your becoming. Second, stop personalizing everything. Not all silence is jealousy. Sometimes people are distracted. Sometimes life is heavy. Sometimes distance is just distance. But when the pattern is consistent, selective, and triggered specifically by your growth, believe what you are seeing. Do not gaslight yourself. Third, understand the deeper law. Some people can accompany your suffering, but not your sovereignty. They can sit beside your confusion, but not your clarity. They can love the unfinished version of you because it did not threaten their position. The completed version, the self-respecting version, the more individuated version, that requires them to rise too, and many will not. Fourth, protect your energy. Silence reveals alignment. It shows you who experiences your progress as joy and who experiences it as injury. That is valuable information. Use it, not to become paranoid, not to become bitter, but to become precise. And finally, keep winning quietly. Not to provoke, not to prove, not to punish, but because your life belongs to your own becoming. Jung's path was never about pleasing the collective. It was about becoming whole, and becoming whole will always disturb those committed to fragmentation. So let them go quiet. Let them pull back. Let them withhold what they cannot genuinely give. Their silence is not the measure of your worth. It is often the measure of their conflict. If people grew silent when you started winning, hear this clearly. You did not necessarily lose support. You may have simply lost the illusion of it. Your growth revealed who loved your essence, and who only loved your smaller form, who celebrated your becoming, and who preferred your uncertainty, who could stand near your pain, but not your power. That is not a tragedy. It is revelation. The path of individuation is not always loud. Sometimes it sounds like fewer calls, fewer messages, fewer congratulations, less noise. But there is something sacred in that silence too. It clears the room. It exposes the hidden contracts. It shows you which connections were built on truth and which were built on imbalance. So if you are in that season now, If your success has made certain people strangely quiet, do not panic, do not dim, do not explain. Keep becoming. Because the silence of jealous people is often the sound of your old world no longer being able to contain who you are becoming. And that means one thing: you are moving. If this spoke to you, comment "sovereign" below and ask yourself the question most people avoid. Who went silent? The moment I stopped needing permission to become myself.